Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and welcome to my review of the MOZA R9 direct drive wheelbase and GS-GT wheel. So for full disclosure before we start, MOZA did send me these items for review, but that's as far as any compensation goes. But there is an affiliate link in the description where I make a little bit of money if you decide to buy because of my review. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my history first and where I'm coming from with this review, because I'm by no means, a professional esports sim racer. I've been doing iRacing for a little bit now, and I've been really enjoying it. And I've played racing games a lot over the years. Your Gran Turismos, Forza Motorsport, dating back all the way to the early 2000s. But something that hasn't changed for about 8 years is my steering wheel. I've been on a Thrustmaster T300 RS, and while other things in my setup have changed, like different pedals, proper load cell pedals, I've gone from having a wheel stand to a proper sim rig setup with its own dedicated screens and all that kind of stuff. All of that has changed except the wheel. The wheel is sort of the oldest thing that is in my setup. And when MOZA reached out to me to offer the chance to try out their R9 direct drive wheelbase and G2 GT wheel, I jumped at the chance. So that I'm going to be reviewing it and talking about it and giving my thoughts from the perspective of someone who's come from a Thrustmaster T300 RS. So for those who are unaware, because I was a little ignorant to it myself, let's talk a little bit about the differences between the different types of wheel that you can have when it comes to sim racing. Now, the three main wheel types are direct drive wheels, which is what this MOZA R9 is, belt-driven wheels, which is what my old wheel is, and gear-driven wheels. Now, I always knew that direct drive was considered better, but I didn't really know the ins and outs, so it's worth giving a quick rundown here. And basically, all wheels work by having a motor inside them that generates the forces that you feel on the wheel. So if you run over a rumble strip or experience understeer, the force feedback system in the wheel uses a motor to generate the feeling of doing those activities. With gear and belt-driven wheels, there's a small motor that's connected to the wheel itself by a belt or a series of gears. The force feedback generated by the small motor is then amplified by that belt or those gears so that you feel it much more on the wheel itself. Now, the main problem with these type of systems is that while they keep the costs a little bit lower because they need a smaller motor, some of the force feedback detail is naturally lost in the translation from the motor to the wheel, and because the motor itself is quite small in the first place, it can lead to a lackluster force feedback experience. Belts and gears can also wear out over time. Direct drive wheels have historically always been more expensive because they do away with the middleman and instead connect the wheel directly to the motor. The motor has to be larger itself and therefore more costly because there's nothing in between amplifying the signal. However, the idea is that there's no loss of force feedback detail because it's being sent directly into your hands. And because the motor's bigger, direct drive wheels can generate much stronger force feedback that's also more direct and better reflecting of what's actually happening in the game. So that's what I'm going to be upgrading to, from an 8-year-old belt-driven wheel to a brand new direct drive wheel. So I figured I'd put in some quick footage of unboxing the wheel and the wheelbase so you can see, what you get in it, and obviously all the, power cables and extra additional little stickers and things that you could put on the wheel. I did do a proper full unboxing. That video went up on my second channel, so feel free to check that out. I'll leave a link to it in the description, sort of a first impressions type thing. But one thing that I did notice, obviously you've got all these different connections on the back of the wheelbase itself, and various different things that you can plug into that. But one thing that I was happy about is that there's actually a power button on this wheelbase, and that's something that I never had on my old wheel. I used to have to unplug it every time, and that was always so annoying. So it's the little things sometimes that you can really appreciate. Having the ability to just turn it off by the press of a button is going to be really helpful. And yeah, obviously I sorted it all out, got everything out, and it was time to retire the old wheel and get the new one installed, which was relatively straightforward, to be honest. It wasn't too big of a deal. Obviously, your mileage may vary with all of that, depending on any setups that you've got and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it wasn't too bad. It was just basically a case of swapping it over, screwing in some holes on the base, and the wheel itself, putting it in, putting the wheel on the wheelbase was fairly easy as well. It's got a quick release system, which is really nice if you've got multiple wheels, multiple MOZA wheels, and you want to take off a GT style wheel and put on a regular wheel or something like that. And yeah, really satisfying to put on as well. Actually, quite sturdy once it's on there. One thing that I was initially a little bit worried about was the gear shifts, and not because they're bad in any way. In fact, they're actually pretty amazing. There's a very satisfying click and a very satisfying feel to the paddles when you pull for another gear, but they are quite loud. And obviously for me, with streaming and having a microphone and all that kind of stuff, that was something that I was a little bit worried about, but I didn't realize this at the time when I did the unboxing video, but I realized it when I was setting up the wheel itself. MOZA actually thought of that, and they included these mute pads to install to the gear paddles, which I did obviously because I want to have the least amount of audio for the stream and videos and things like that. When you install those, which was relatively easy to do, it does give it a slightly less satisfying feel to pull each gear on the paddle, but there's no real impact to the performance of it. If anything, it's slightly easier to pull the gears since the magnets that this whole system works on, they're not as close to each other. But yeah, just to keep in mind that is an option if if it's something that relates to you. But if you're not recording anything or needing a microphone on all the time, if you're streaming or something, you can just keep the gears as they are. And yeah, it is very satisfying to pull those gears, especially compared to my previous wheel. Speaking of comparisons to my previous wheel, the smaller form factor of the base itself, the R9 base, is much nicer. Obviously, the whole thing has a much more premium feel. It's a more expensive wheel setup than what I ever had, but the wheelbase itself, you can tell that it's a proper piece of kit, basically, in comparison to sort of the plasticky nature of my previous wheel. So before we get into it properly, I just want to point out there's two aspects to this review. There's first of all the R9 direct drive wheel base, and that is basically the thing that has the motor in it. That's the thing that you put the steering wheel on. And the R9 signifies that there's 9 Newton meters of torque power available. It goes down to the R5, which is more of a budget friendly option, all the way up to R21, which has 21 Newton meters of torque. Obviously it depends on what you want and how much you want in terms of the force feedback power that you're going to have. Obviously, I'm going to be reviewing the R9, but there are other options available. And then there's also the GT wheel that I'm going to be reviewing as well. This is the GS version 2, which basically just means that it's also compatible with the newer R5 wheelbase. That is basically the thing that you put on the wheelbase. So you can get different wheel attachments for the base, and you can get different wheelbases that are all compatible with any wheel that you have. Obviously, MOZA are trying to create an ecosystem where you can switch things out and chop and change things, and it seems to work pretty well based on the quick release that I've been experiencing. So first of all, let's talk about the settings that you have available to you for the wheelbase and the way that the wheel feels. There's honestly an overwhelming amount of options, at least for me as a relative novice. I know my way around driving and racing, but when it comes to the finer details of how I want the wheel to feel, there's a lot that I'm going to have to unpack with this and try to learn as I go. But basically, it feels like once you download the MOZA Pit House software, there's so many options for customization that can be done within that software to get the feeling that you want. The amount of force feedback, the way that it reacts to certain bumps and all this kind of stuff. There's also different presets for the type of car that you're going to be driving, which is quite handy. Whether you're going from a formula car or an open wheel car all the way to just a regular supercar, you can sort of click those presets and it will sort of tailor the wheel to feel what is right for the car that you're going to be in. And you can also create your own presets as well. I just left it to those presets and didn't really mess around too much with any of the extra stuff. And I think it's good that those presets are there for those who, just want to kind of plug and play, if you like. And also when it comes to the steering wheel itself, it can obviously be quite overwhelming there as well, because there are a lot of buttons on this steering wheel. Obviously it's a GT wheel, so it's kind of simulating what a GT racer would be having with their steering wheel. MOZA do other kinds of wheels, from your standard sort of circular wheel all the way to a Formula style wheel with a little display and dashboard. All of these buttons that are on the wheel that I have can basically be set to whatever you want in the various games that you play. So whether it's pit limiters, wipers, lights, all that kind of stuff. It's better to have more buttons than you need, I think. That's a limitation that I found with the old wheel. And there is a helpful guide to tell you which numbers on the buttons in the software line up to which button. So it's easier when setting things up in the game. And the knobs on the steering wheel actually act as either up and down buttons or for individual values as well. You can change how they behave. There's so much customization that you can do to get it to be exactly what you want it to be. But for example, when I was setting up the ABS knob in iRacing, I actually set it to control the ABS setting. So if I set the knob on the steering wheel to 10 or 4 or 2, then it sets it to the same number in game. For racing nerds, like I'm sure many of you are, this was just kind of an awesome experience. That whatever I actually set it to on the steering wheel, it was changing to in game, rather than it just being sort of, you turn it to the right and it goes up, or you turn it to the left and it goes down. It was really cool, and that kind of feeling is the same for pretty much all of the buttons on this steering wheel. Once you've mapped it all in game, and you've got a button for the pit limiter, you've got a button for your wipers and all this kind of stuff, and you actually come to use them, it's a completely different experience. As an FYI, MOZA do recommend that you wear gloves with this wheel, although I think that is more of a standard practice these days for more higher end wheels. So I got out my old karting gloves and got down to some driving to take it for a spin and see how it felt. Now obviously all of this is through the lens of me comparing it to my old 8-year-old Thrustmaster belt driven wheel, but the first thing I said was, holy shit. It's difficult for a relative novice again like me to put into words exactly what I'm experiencing and feeling when I'm actually driving with this wheel. But one of the best ways that I can explain it is that I can feel the braking and acceleration through the steering wheel. Obviously, you feel a lot more than that, but that's the best way that I can describe just how much feel for what's happening that you get. Even things that you wouldn't be expecting to be feeling through the steering wheel, you can feel. And this is all just on the base settings. I played around a little bit to get things corrected iRacing, but there's still a lot more messing around I need to do to get the best experience. But in comparison to my old wheel, the difference is absolutely night and day. I hadn't been on iRacing for a good 2 months when I loaded this session up, but I very quickly felt more comfortable than I ever have done with how the car was handling with this new wheel. Naturally, it's going to take some time to be able to set all the same lap times as I was before, but I was surprised, honestly, with how quickly things came to me, and I think a lot of the credit for that goes down to how well the wheel translates to your hands the things that you're doing in the car. I felt I had much more control and information about what I was doing in comparison to the past and the previous experiences I'd had. Just more connected to the car in a way. There was actually one moment where I had a little bit of a moment on cold tires, and it felt pretty effortless to recognize it and subsequently save it. And it was only when I thought about it afterwards that I realized that probably would have been much more difficult with my old wheel. And I think that the thing that I'm trying to get across with this, especially with my original comment about being able to sort of feel the acceleration and the braking through the wheel, because you wouldn't normally feel those sorts of things when you've just got a sort of, well, I certainly couldn't with my original wheel. Yes, you feel a bit of understeer every now and then, but nothing straight line related. It's more, I'm saying this more to demonstrate how much more of a feel you get from this direct drive wheelbase and system, because you're just getting a much finer grain detail of what the car is doing, and it's going to be very, very helpful as sort of a step up when you're reaching a sort of limit of what you can do. And for me at least, I always get to that point and I'm like, I don't know what I need to do to go faster. And yeah, there might be a limit of my own skill and ability at some point, but I also always felt a little bit held back by I'm not exactly sure what the car is doing in this specific instance, and I think this wheel is going to really help with that. As a small aside, the rev lights on the wheel also actually ended up helping more than I thought they would, since I'd actually used the bar flashing on the steering wheel to inform me when to change gear rather than the rev lights in the game. It was just for some reason easier to see. I think MOZA do add-ons for race displays, and I can see them being a big help, honestly, based on this experience that I've had. There's just something about having it right there in front of you in person rather than on the game that makes a big difference, whether it's knowing what gear you're in or seeing the rev lights light up and knowing when to change gears. Just there's something about having it right there rather than having to think about where it is in the game, and you know, it's easier to see it in your peripheral vision, I think. Now, don't get me wrong, I've done very well with my old wheel. I've come a long way, and I've even won a division in the Touring Car Championship last year, as we've covered in the iRacing series. You don't need a direct drive wheel to be able to do well, but as direct drive wheels are seemingly getting cheaper with sort of more entry-level models like MOZA's R5, the model below the R9 that I have, I'm sure there's probably going to be a point where all steering wheels will just end up being direct drive, because honestly, based on my small experience here for this video review, it really is so much better than the other options. And obviously this is going to be my new wheel that I'm using all the time, and I'm just going to be racing with it, and hopefully it will help me to improve even more. One thing that I've heard is that you do sometimes have to be careful with direct drive wheels, especially if you crash, because the force of the wheel can hurt your hands if you don't let it go in time. Thankfully, there is a setting in the MOZA software that helps with this, and it's recommended for novices. I obviously left it on, but yeah, you are covered in that respect, and it is on by default as well. So if you don't want that, you do have to go into the settings to turn it off. And obviously there's still plenty more for me to uncover and play around with. But like I said, this is going to be my new daily driver for when I jump back on iRacing, and I am looking forward to see if it's going to help me improve over time. It's certainly a worthy upgrade on my old wheel, and it's definitely something that I can recommend if anybody is in the same boat that I was. And ultimately, that's that's as much as I can give in terms of my advice, because I'm not here reviewing different wheelbases every week and different steering wheels. That's not what my channel is about. But I can, if you're in the same boat that I was, you've got an older wheel, it's certainly worth looking into a direct drive wheel. Certainly worth looking into MOZA's, because I've had a flawless experience from their product so far. I don't have anything bad to say about it, really. It's a quality piece of kit, what I've gotten here, but there's also other options as well that are even cheaper or even more expensive if you want to go that route. But certainly if you're on a belt driven wheel or a gear driven wheel, looking into upgrading to a direct drive wheel, if you are serious about your racing and you've got a full setup and things like that, it's certainly worth looking into, because the difference that I felt in terms of the driving was substantial. But obviously that's the rub of the situation, isn't it? Like, you have to have the setup ready for this to take full advantage of it. I don't think it would be good for me to have this direct drive wheel with my old foldable wheel stand that I used to have. I'm only able to sort of maximize the experience from it because I have the full rig set up and all this kind of stuff. It's all about sort of how serious you are with it, what kind of setup you've got, as to whether this would be appropriate for you. But all I can say is, for me and for my situation and for my experience, it's a massive upgrade, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to use it and hopefully continue to get better with it. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope it's helped, and I hope it's given you something to think about when it comes to these wheels and what you might want to get. If you do choose to look at some MOZA wheels, there is a link in the description to their site where you can check them out. Obviously, again, I had the R9 wheelbase and the GSGT wheel, but there's many other options for them as well. And obviously, thank you very much to MOZA for sending me the wheelbase and the wheel. that I can now continue to use and hopefully get better with. So yeah, thank you to them for providing the products for the review. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully it's been helpful, and I'll see you in an iRacing video soon, because it is going to be coming back.